and welcome to session 3 of Media Law and Ethics. I see that I have a message here. Please move this window away from the shared application. Okay, well, please call me, give me a call or a WhatsApp if there are any technical issues or if there's anything that you can't see. So I'm proceeding assuming that you can see and hear me going forward. Thank you, guys. So today I'm going to give some feedback on session 2, the practical that we had on content aggregation, and we'll also be dealing with the law of privacy, which is quite a difficult topic. So without further ado, let's get cracking. The practical exercise that you guys had in the last week was about content aggregation, and you would have received 2 texts via email. The first was from Business Insider and the second from Caxton Local Media. And both stories that I sent you dealt with a fungus that hit South Africa's private hospitals. So what I asked you to do was to take a look at the first text from Business Insider and the second from Caxton Local Media, and to tell me whether when you compare the 2 texts, they are substantially similar, or whether Caxton Local Media's story had something that was very unique and that could substantially distinguish it from what Business Insider had written. Now, in my capacity as legal advisor, I was asked to write up a report on the very same issue. And on the left-hand side is an example of what my report would normally look like. As you can see, the text is blurred because it is confidential information, but this just gives you an idea of how policy contraventions would normally be handled. So we had allegations of plagiarism, copyright violation, and unfair content aggregation, and my findings were as follows. On plagiarism, I found that because the journalist credited Business Insider, there was no plagiarism, because as you know, plagiarism is when you repeat someone else's story, misrepresenting it as your own. So plagiarism was absent. Copyright violation, however, was present, because if you compare the 2 texts, you would have noticed that large portions were copied and pasted from the Business Insider story to the Caxton Local Media story. And that was not justifiable. And then lastly, if you compared the 2 texts that I sent you, you would have seen that the gist of the Business Insider story was the gist of the Caxton Local Media story, and that no unique angle was added in the Caxton story, and I therefore found that unfair content aggregation was present. I have received 1 or 2 submissions from you guys that came to different conclusions, and I just want to say that I want you guys to establish contact with me, please, so that we can go through content aggregation again if you have any questions, because this was an example of unfair content aggregation. Most of you agreed, and I want to thank you once again for your submissions. Okay, for the record, I am recording this session, so if you don't want to be featured in any way on the recording, please ensure that your video feed is deactivated. Okay, just on to the next slide. So, media and privacy law in South Africa. We don't have a specific privacy law or one privacy act in South Africa, but you have the constitutional right to privacy, as you all know. We have a reasonable privacy expectation, each and every one of us, and we have some laws protecting our privacy rights. POPI is one example. I want you to know that the POPI Act does not bind newsrooms, and the reason for that is that we voluntarily subscribe to the Press Code of South Africa. Clause 4 of the Press Code states how you should handle private information. And long story short is, if you are doing news gathering, please ensure that any personal information you might have is always stored safely, that you don't leave it lying around, that you don't distribute it irresponsibly, and that you have it only for news gathering purposes. Once you're done with it, please destroy it so as to ensure that the wrong people don't end up getting hold of it. When it comes to the media, privacy issues are handled on a case-by-case basis. This is not as simple as criminal law. Criminal law is easy. You know you can't commit murder. That is the hard and fast rule, and that is how it always works. Privacy law is a more bendable concept, and that is what I'm going to illustrate during this lecture. And I'm also going to give you some basic guidelines on how to approach privacy issues. Privacy has a lot to do with logic. Good example. I used the classic and slightly overused "this is Pete" meme. This is Pete. He is naked in public. Pete wishes not to be photographed. Don't be like Pete. Common sense says if you go out walking in public naked, people are going to see you, and you therefore don't have a reasonable privacy expectation. Silly example, I know, but it works. This guy, for example, does not have a reasonable expectation that people will not see him streaking because he's doing so in front of a huge crowd. Just to illustrate privacy and logic once again. This is Bill. Bill knows not to film his neighbor while she is showering. That is common sense, and that has a lot to do with privacy. Be like Bill. Another example, if I could move along to the next slide, of a reasonable privacy expectation is someone in the shower. Now, I'm using these examples that might seem rather mundane, but you will understand why reasonable privacy expectation is important with this example. Our former and now deceased Minister of Health was very controversial, and you guys will remember from quite a few years ago, there was a court case regarding her right to privacy. And she was hospitalized because she had liver problems. This Minister of Health was very outspoken against alcohol abuse. And while she was in hospital with these liver problems, her medical records leaked. Now, all of us have the right to privacy, especially when it comes to your medical records. You have a legally recognized privacy expectation that these records won't be leaked. However, sometimes your right to privacy can be stepped on or trampled upon if the public interest or public benefit absolutely dictates that this is necessary. So, in this case, Minister of Health, outspoken against alcohol abuse, ends up in the hospital with a liver problem. Her medical records indicate that she was drinking in hospital, and the media got hold of that. So she went to court. She wanted an interdict stating that the media is not allowed to publish what is contained in her medical records because that had indicated that she was drinking in hospital. And the court said two things. Firstly, does she have a reasonable privacy expectation when it comes to her medical records? And the court said absolutely. All South Africans have the right to have their medical information be kept private. I have it, you have it, we all have it. But then comes the question, even though you have that reasonable privacy expectation, does public interest dictate that we need to now step onto that right, or that we need to publish information that could be private in favor of the public interest? And in this case, the court said absolutely. If your Minister of Health is outspoken against alcohol abuse, has a liver problem, and is drinking in hospital, and of course the taxpayer, funds her to be the Minister of Health, and in that case, the court said, although you have a right to privacy, the right to public interest in this case, and the right to freedom of expression is going to weigh heavier. And for that reason, the court said that the publication of her medical records, or what it contained, was justifiable in the public interest. So this illustrates why the term reasonable privacy expectation is so important, and how that is weighed up against the right to freedom of expression in the public interest. Here are a few more examples of private information. Your ID number, your address, your car registration number, your contact number, medical records, as we said, the contents of my handbag, contents of my home, the contents of my cell phone, stuff that I could reasonably expect to be kept private. A good example of where publication of personal information got us into trouble is this one from Mpumalanga News. Ilanga Mall is a rather large mall in Mbombela, and they have a mud makeup store. Now, this woman on the screen grab wearing the red and black shirt was featured on CCTV footage. She was standing at the counter of the store and she grabbed a cell phone. Footage then features her leaving the store and getting out of the mall, climbing into a very fancy Jeep and driving away. On the CCTV footage, you can clearly see the car registration number of the Jeep. So the publication published this video as well as screenshots from it depicting the Jeep and the car registration number. This led some readers to do a registration search and to identify the owner of the vehicle. This woman lives in Joburg, and she was then publicly identified as having stolen the cell phone. In truth, the owner of the Jeep was completely innocent, as the syndicate behind the cell phone theft is also a syndicate behind false number plates. So they issued a false number plate, put it on the Jeep, got caught on CCTV footage, newspaper publishes that CCTV footage, and an innocent woman in Joburg is identified in connection with a crime. Needless to say, she threatened to sue, and we eventually had to retract and apologize following publication of this video. Now, your question is obviously going to be, if there's a theft and there's CCTV footage, what should I be doing? Contact the police and tell them you have the CCTV footage and it features, the suspects getting into the vehicle. Would the police like a copy? And should you identify the persons in the video? Are they wanted or not? Very often, identifying persons on such a video prior to their first court appearance could be detrimental to the state's case because it messes up identity parades, and then eventually it is used by defense lawyers to get them off on criminal charges. So keep that in mind. Also speak to the police and blur personal information, because frankly, I don't need to know the car registration number in order to know that this theft had taken place at the mall. So you don't always need to know that personal info. So as a rule of thumb, please always blur card registration numbers. About that, identifying suspects and missing persons. We'll deal with this when we get to crime reporting, but I just want you to know the basics because this is two closely related issues. We name suspects only once they've appeared in court, except if they are wanted, which makes sense. So let's say I was wanted for a crime, and if the police then gave you my photo and said, please ask community members to be on the lookout for Helene, then you'd be publishing my photo and divulging my identity. When you do that, please expressly indicate that police asked you to do so and that community members should contact the police if they see me. That makes sense, right? With sex offences and extortion, please wait until the accused have pleaded before identifying them. And then when you have a minor crime victim or a minor suspect, do not name them. Now, these are the rules of thumb, and there are exceptions. We'll be discussing those when we get to court and crime reporting. I just wanted you guys to take note of these basic rules of thumb for now. Okay, this is a good example of when you would publish personal information. In this case, we have a citizen story saying that the public should be on the lookout for fake police vehicles. In this instance, it makes a lot of sense to publish the registration number. But if you do that, indicate that police asked you to do so, explaining why you're splashing personal information. This is a very cool example, a recent one from the North Coast, Korea. As you can see, it deals with drugs found in an estate. Drugs worth 154 million uncovered at upmarket Belito Estate Meth Lab. So this is a fancy eco estate. I went on Google Earth. As you can see, I took you guys a screenshot to show what estate we're dealing with. It's the Simbiti Eco Estate. It's close to the ocean. It's lovely. And one of their residents thought it would be a good idea to cook up some meth in his or her residence. And that brought up the topic of estates and complexes and privacy expectations in these estates and complexes. Now, we all know that every person who owns a house has a privacy expectation related to that property. And even if you rent a home, wherever you live, you have a privacy expectation, which is fair because it's your home, it's where you reside. What is the position, and I want you to think about this is the practical exercise that I want you to discuss amongst yourselves. If you drive into an estate or a complex, you drive onto private property. The estate is represented by the blue square on your screens. So there's this privacy expectation relating to the estate itself, the big property, and then each individual property owner within the estate has a privacy expectation relating to the larger estate as well as to his or her individual property. And those are represented by the green and red squares within the blue square. I want you guys to think about the following. What is the reasonable privacy expectation of the resident in the, let's say, hypothetically speaking, the owner of the red property is cooking up meth. You live in the green property. What is your reasonable privacy expectation if the media gets a tip-off that the guy in the red property is cooking meth? They need to take a photo of his private residence. But in order to do that, they need to gain access to the estate. And you have a privacy expectation regarding to the larger, pertaining to the larger estate. So let's say you're a journo and you want to take a video. You're driving to the crime scene, you're telling your readers, well, okay, you're not doing it, your hands are on the steering wheel. So let's say you have a dash cam and you're telling your readers, yeah, I'm driving into the Simbiti Eco Estate, I'm passing a number of houses, I'm on my way to the meth lab. If you do that, then you pass many individual property owners who have done nothing wrong and who have a reasonable privacy expectation. So where does that leave them? Where does that leave you? Let's say the police are allowed inside, they are taking photos of the red property, in other words, the property where the crime was committed. Do you still have an absolute right to go inside and to take photos of the property? That's what I want you guys to discuss in your newsrooms during this week. Please use about 5 or 10 minutes to do so. We all enter into privacy agreements every day. If I tell you a secret, that means I expect a certain privacy, I have a reasonable privacy expectation. If I enter your business premises and you have a sign saying that this is private property, then I agree to that. If I take a photo of a mother jogging, with her baby in a pram, and she covers the child's face, and I respectfully step away, once again, that's a privacy agreement. I say, okay, you don't want your child to be photographed, I'll step away. Think about these agreements because you enter into these every day, multiple times a day. So when you go out to take a photo or a video, what should you remember when figuring out what someone's reasonable privacy right is and how to respect that while doing your job? The first thing is public interest. You won't take a photo or video of something if it isn't in the public interest, and you won't publish anything that's not in the public interest because that's our business. News is public interest stuff. So we do good news. Obviously, good news has a lower threshold because if something is family friendly and it's good news and my community wants to know it, then it should be okay for me to publish it. But when it comes to hard news, the threshold for public interest increases. Then I would define it as something that my community needs to see in order to make them function effectively as residents of their community. You will remember that we went through this definition last week as well. So before you consider publishing anything, ask yourself, is this in the public interest, or is it merely interesting? Is it merely Skinner? Or is it just publicly available? Is it just stuff that's on Facebook and I feel like I have an obligation to repost it now because the whole community is gossiping about it? Important things to keep in mind. This slide deals with the difference between public interest, publicly available, and interesting. You guys will remember Malusi Gigaba. He had this dick pic that was going around. And unfortunately, some news outlets thought that his anatomy was news. And for the life of me, I cannot fathom why I need to know what a minister's genitals look like in order for me to decide whether or not he is good at his job, or for me to effectively function as a member of a democratic society. Something like that is not in the public interest. The same applies with Chris Evans in an international context. You guys will know that the guy who plays Captain America accidentally posted a nude photo. And I enjoyed Mark Ruffalo's response, just on a humorous note. Mark Ruffalo said, "Bro, while Trump is in the office, there is nothing you could possibly do to embarrass yourself. See the silver lining." So I thought that was quite funny. And then Wimfiki in our own newsrooms, you guys will remember this video of a guy in Mpumalanga who was caught on video. The inference was that he was possibly involved in some sexual activity, paid, unpaid, we don't know. But we published it, and the video obviously got many views, and there was quite a lot of social interaction on social media, but the Ombud was quite cross at us, and he said it might have been interesting, it might have been publicly available, but this video was never in the public interest. So please always remember that your first go-to issue is public interest. Secondly, if you take a photo or video, location, location, location. Where you are is going to determine how big your right to freedom of expression is in relation to your subject's right to privacy. If you're in a public place, you can generally snap away. Take the video, take the photo, and you should generally be able to publish it. However, if there's a minor, remember you can't publish their photo without the permission of a guardian or parent. We'll deal with that in a moment. Let's get back to location. So if it's public, you take your photo, you take your video, you go ahead. If you're in a semi-private place, or a semi-public place, such as a big office with, say, 80 employees, or a mall, restaurant, tea garden, then it's less public, so your right, your privacy expectation would be a bit stronger than it is when you're next to the N1, for example. Nonetheless, I would say take your photo, take your video. If someone stops you, consider the surrounding circumstances. If you're taking a video footage of something that is in the public interest and someone stops you and you're in a semi-public place, then there will be room for argument for you to say, look, this is in the public interest, I'm continuing to do my job. Whereas if you're merely taking a social photo and someone says, please delete my photo, if there's not a lot of public interest there, then the fair thing would be to delete the photo. If you're at someone's private residence, don't take photos of them if you haven't notified them and if they're not okay with it, because it's their private residence. I won't appreciate you guys coming into my home and filming me without my permission, and I think you'll feel the same. So, public interest firstly, location secondly. On the topic of public and privacy expectations, last week we dealt with copyright, and you will remember that we spoke about using photos off of Facebook. One of the questions that you asked me, thank you for that, was what do I do if someone comments on my publication's Facebook page? Can I use that comment? And can I use their profile picture? The answer is yes. The reason is when you sign up for Facebook, you agree that if you participate in a public conversation, such as on a publication's Facebook page, then you agree that what you're saying is publicly available, that it can be reused, and then also your profile picture is public. So when someone participates in a conversation on our Facebook page, we can absolutely use that in, for example, an online vox pop. Good example here is a national news story that was shared on Lofelder's Facebook page. I had quite a laugh at this comment. Mandla Nkosi commented, Natasha Swanepoel commented, and then there's one from Aniki Basson-Spies. Aniki says, now we are waiting for the ANC to be arrested for all their corruption. And I thought it was an incredibly odd comment to make, because I can just imagine Aniki thinking that the entire ANC will now be arrested. Based on what, I'm not sure. But Aniki, for example, you will be able to use that comment, and her profile pic is public. There are no children on it. So that would be an example of a comment that you may use. Not that I would suggest using that particular comment. So we've dealt with public interest, we've dealt with location. Now we're dealing with the subject, the person that you are filming. When you're filming a minor, regardless of whether this is public or in private, you need the permission of their parent or guardian. This can be given tacitly. So let's say I'm a mom and you take a photo of my child and I do not stop you and I'm around. That means that you have my tacit permission. So if a parent doesn't stop you explicitly and they are around, same with a guardian, then it means you have permission. If you're at a school and you take photos and the school does not stop you, that means you have tacit permission from the child's guardian, because while a child is at school, the school qualifies as their guardian for purposes such as these. Now, we have a few schools that have indicated that they are unsure about privacy rights and that they are worried about providing the media with photos. So if we publish photos that we got from a school, whose job is it to ensure that the privacy rights are in order? The answer is that it's the school's job. So we rely on the school to provide us with photos, and we can trust that the school gives us photos that they are allowed to give us. So if you ever deal with a school and they're unsure about their privacy role or privacy rights, you can give them my number, give them my email address. I will gladly chat to a school representative and explain the privacy laws to them so that they know what their responsibilities are. If a school tells you you can go onto our Facebook page and get photos of an event there, you can do that. That will be fine because the school took the photos as the child's guardian. So I trust you guys are fine with that. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me a WhatsApp. As you can see, I have my phone with me all the time. Okay, this is a good example of one of our publications that got content featuring minors, and they also got permission from the minors' legal guardians to use this content. It was taken during lockdown, and it's about a family from George that did quite a creative video. They made this video during lockdown and gave permission for us to use it, and I think it's rather cute.
Hey kids, kom ons gaan dorp toe.
Ons gaan dorp toe. Ja, ons gaan dorp.
Hey there, flash some juice.
Yeah!
So that's a good example of using content featuring kids with permission of their guardians. I'm still not sure what that in the right corner in the back is doing, but I assume he's a family friend. So I summarized it for you guys in a poster. You can take a screenshot if you'd like. Before you publish, what to consider. Is it in the public interest? If the answer is no, chuck it. If the answer is yes, continue and publish. Location. The more public the place, the greater the right to freedom of expression and the smaller the expectation of privacy. Minors. Always remember that you need permission. This could be given tacitly. So you take your photos if nobody stops you and there are adults who could act as guardians of the child and they don't stop you, then it's fine. Incriminating stuff, very important. If you have a photo or a video with incriminating content, you need to offer those on the video or the photo the right of reply. And this is a great example. It's from Mossel Bay Advertiser. Our journalist was still gathering news And the allegation was that the man in the red shirt was cutting off an indigenous tree. And she then stopped outside his home. And as you can see, she took a photo. And the thing is now, this is his private home. So even though you can see inside his yard, he still has a reasonable privacy expectation when it comes to his private property. So we have a privacy infringement there, but it can be justified. So she then went to this guy and she spoke to him and asked him, what's the story? And found out that one, this was not an indigenous tree. And secondly, the roots of this tree was cracking a piece of wall, remnants of a wall that was built centuries ago when the first, I think, Portuguese settlers arrived. So there was a kind of a monument that was being threatened by the roots of this tree that was not indigenous. So no crime committed there. If he was indeed committing a crime, that would have rendered his private property public. So it would have been okay to take and publish this photo. But please remember, anything incriminating on a photo or video, then you must give those in it the right of reply prior to publication. Some general remarks. You guys get removal requests. I've received some of them. Thank you for passing them on. We have a policy on handling those. So if you receive a removal request, please just pass it on to me. I'll gladly handle it. This is one of the saddest requests I've dealt with. On this video, you can see Marlene Slabbert. She's learning to walk again. She was in an accident with her fiancé, Rian Foley. He appears on these photos. She lost him in the accident. She was seriously injured. Due to her injury, she was unable to attend his funeral, and they thought she would never be able to walk again. Eventually, she could, but it is now, I think, 2 years later, and it's incredibly traumatic for her to have this on the internet. So whenever she goes on Google, or I don't know, Googles herself or Rian for whatever reason, then these memories come up. And she then asked us to remove the content. Unfortunately, and in terms of the policy, I had to say no, which was a very, very tough thing to do. But just so you guys know, if you receive removal requests, please pass them on to me. I'll gladly handle them. Most of you will recognize this slide from previous years. Jacques Pauw, I included this mainly for the newcomers. Jacques Pauw is a celebrated South African journalist, and he learned that Julius Malema has a home inside a complex owned by Mazotti. Now, you will remember the Mazotti name has been connected with the Guptas and with fraud and corruption allegations. So Jacques thought, okay, so Malema has a home in Mazotti's complex. A photo of the home must be in the public interest. That's what he assumed. He took a photo of the home and placed it on social media. SANEF said, please take it off. They then distinguished between a fact being in the public interest and a photo or video of that fact being in the public interest. And SANEF said, by all means, the fact that Malema has a home there is in the public interest. But taking a photograph of his actual private home and putting it online is an unjustifiable infringement of his right to privacy. And I think you guys will agree that although, let's say, I have a home in a corrupt person's complex, that fact might be in the public interest, and by all means report on it. But don't put my personal home in the newspaper, thereby telling everyone exactly where I live, because that would be an unjustifiable privacy violation. To get back to privacy and social media, you'll remember that we dealt with privacy settings last week. Remember, just because someone is your friend on social media and you can see their photos, doesn't mean that you can use it in your publication. Always check that you only use publicly available photos if you must harvest them from social media. And if you do, stick to the fair usage rules we discussed last week. And then I just want to focus your guys' attention on this week's practical exercise. It has been emailed to you. If you haven't received it, please let me know. And then I leave you with that and with some excitement. I know you guys always love court and crime reporting. So our next session will be about crime reporting. So ensure that that you're ready, that you have your coffee, and I look forward to chatting to you again in a week's time. Thanks for your time. I see we have 2 minutes left.